The vault overseer, a man named Harold, had been in his position for 20 years. He had been through the good and the bad, the great and the terrible. But nothing could have prepared him for this day. Today was Nuke Day, the day when the nuclear missiles would be launched from the top of the mountain and into the sky. It was a day that Harold had dreaded since the day he took his post. He had never been exposed to the outside world, but he had heard horror stories of the destruction and chaos that nuclear weapons could bring. Harold had taken all the precautions he could to make sure that his vault was prepared for the worst. He had stockpiled food and supplies, sealed off the entrances, and made sure that every citizen was aware of the dangers. He had even gone so far as to create a bunker-like structure underground for those who could not make it to the vault in time. But despite all of his preparation, Harold still couldn't help but feel uneasy as the day of the launch approached. He had done all he could to make sure that his people were safe, but he was still worried. The morning of Nuke Day arrived, and Harold took his place in the vault control room. He watched as the countdown began, and the seconds ticked away. As the launch neared, Harold felt a deep sense of dread. He knew his people were safe, but he couldn't help but worry about the people outside the vault. Suddenly, the alarm sounded and the nuclear missiles were launched. Harold watched in horror as the sky lit up with a blinding light and the ground shook. He could only imagine the destruction that was occurring outside the vault. The next few days were a blur. Harold and the citizens of the vault waited in fear as they waited for news of the outside world. Every day, more news came in, and each time the news was worse than the last. The world outside the vault was a wasteland. Buildings were destroyed, the air was toxic, and the ground was a dead gray. But the people of the vault were safe and unharmed. Harold was relieved, but he couldn't help but feel a deep sadness for all the people who had been affected by the nuclear attack. He knew that many people had died, and he could only hope that things would get better in time. For the next few months, Harold and the citizens of the vault lived in a state of relative peace. They started rebuilding, and slowly but surely they began to move on from the disaster. However, the citizens never forgot the day of Nuke Day. Every year, on the anniversary of the launch, the citizens of the vault gathered to remember those who had been lost and to celebrate the fact that they had survived against all odds. Harold, too, would always remember the day of Nuke Day. He had seen the destruction and chaos that nuclear weapons could bring, and he had seen firsthand how quickly life could be changed forever. But he also knew that, if the vault had not been prepared, the destruction and chaos would have been much worse. Harold was thankful every day for the citizens of the vault. They had endured a great tragedy, but they had come out of it stronger and more determined than ever. Harold knew that, as long as the citizens remained vigilant and prepared, they could endure anything. The first settlers of the new space colony on Mars had arrived. After years of planning, the space agency had finally managed to make an interplanetary mission successful. Everyone was excited as they stepped onto the red soil of the planet. The colony was named Mars 1, and it was the first of its kind. After months of preparation, the crew was ready to start building the first permanent human settlement on the planet. They were going to be the pioneers of a new era, the first human residents of Mars. The first order of business was to construct the colony's main base. This was a large, dome-shaped building that would serve as the heart of the settlement. It was designed to provide the necessary shelter, protection, and resources for the new colonists. Once the base was completed, the colonists started to build outwards. They constructed several smaller buildings and dwellings around the main base. These housed the crew, their equipment, and the necessary supplies to sustain the colony. The next step was to begin terraforming the area. This involved adding water, soil, and air to the planet's surface in order to make it habitable. The colonists also planted various plants and trees in order to create an atmosphere that was similar to Earth's. As the colony grew, more and more people began to arrive from Earth. Many of them were scientists and engineers who wanted to help with the terraforming and construction of the colony. Others were simply looking for a new start on a distant planet. The colony began to take shape over the course of several months. The colonists worked hard to make Mars 1 a place to call home. They built large farms to provide food for the colonists, constructed factories to produce goods, and constructed laboratories to study the planet. The colonists also established communication with Earth. This was done through a series of satellites that were launched into orbit to relay messages and information back and forth. This allowed the colonists to keep in touch with their families back home. The colony continued to grow and develop over the next few years. New buildings were erected, new technologies were developed, and the colonists continued to make Mars 1 their home. They even managed to send the first unmanned rover to the planet's surface. As the years passed, the colony continued to thrive. The colonists had managed to make Mars 1 into a self-sustaining settlement. They had managed to create a new home in a distant world, and it was a place where people could live and thrive. Mars 1 had become a symbol of hope and progress. It showed that humans could look beyond the stars and build a new life in a distant world. The colony had become a source of pride for the people of Earth, and it showed that anything was possible if you put your mind to it. The colony continued to progress and develop over the years. It was a living example of humanity's ingenuity and determination. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult a task may seem, anything is possible with enough hard work and dedication. Mars 1 was a success, and it proved that humans could survive and thrive on a distant planet. It showed what was possible when people worked together towards a common goal. The colony was a symbol of hope and progress, and it would serve as an inspiration for generations to come. The moon was always a fascinating object in the night sky for people on Earth. For centuries, people looked up at it and wondered what could possibly be on its surface. It was a mystery, an unknown world of possibility that was out of reach. That all changed in the year 2045 when the first human mission to the moon was launched. The mission was a success and the first human settlements on the moon were established. Humanity had finally reached a new world, a new frontier that would bring forth a new era of exploration and discovery. The first settlement was named Lunar City, and it was the first of many. Over the next decade, more settlements were established and the population on the moon began to grow. The moon was no longer a distant, uninhabited rock in the night sky, it was now a bustling metropolis of humanity. The settlements were built using the latest technologies in engineering and architecture. The structures were designed to be structurally sound and resistant to the harsh environment of the moon's surface. The lunar environment was harsh and unforgiving, but humanity was determined to make it habitable. The settlers were brave pioneers who had come to the moon to make a new life for themselves. They worked hard to make the settlements into thriving communities and the moon into a welcoming and friendly place. Soon, the settlements became hubs of commerce and industry, with people from all over the world flocking to the moon to make a living. The settlements were also home to a variety of scientific research and exploration. Scientists from all over the world came to the moon to conduct experiments and explore the surface. From studying the geology of the moon to looking for evidence of life, the scientists pushed the boundaries of what was known about the moon. The settlements eventually grew to the point where they had to be connected. A network of underground tunnels was constructed connecting the settlements together. This allowed the settlers to travel freely between the settlements and to enjoy the resources of the entire moon. The settlements were also connected to Earth through a network of communications satellites. This allowed the settlers to stay in touch with their families and friends back home, as well as to access the latest news and entertainment. The settlements were a success and the population on the moon continued to grow. Soon, the settlements had to be expanded and new settlements were built. The settlements grew to the point where they became cities, and the moon was now home to millions of people. The moon had become a new home for humanity, a place where people could live and work and explore. The moon was now a vibrant and thriving world of its own, with its own culture and its own way of life. The moon had become a new home for humanity, but it was not without its challenges. The moon was an inhospitable environment and the settlers had to find ways to make it livable. They had to devise ways to create food, water, and energy, and had to find ways to make the lunar environment hospitable. The settlers worked hard to make the moon a livable place and soon the Earth's moon had become a thriving space colony. The moon was now home to millions of people from all over the world and had become a vibrant and thriving world of its own. The moon was now a bustling hub of activity and exploration. People from all over the world came to the moon to make a living and to explore the unknown. There were new technologies, new industries, and new opportunities to be explored. The moon had become a place of awe and wonder, a place where dreams could come true. The moon had become a place of hope and opportunity. Humanity had reached a new frontier, and the moon was now a thriving world of its own. The Earth's moon had become a place of exploration and discovery, a place of possibility and potential. The moon had become humanity's new home in the stars. Prologue. It had taken over 200 years to reach the Gliese 667cc system, but the effort was worth it. The Gliese 667cc system contained a known habitable planet, and it was the only known planet in the system that could support life. Now, the colonists had arrived, and they were about to start up a space colony on this planet. The colonists had come from all over the universe, from a variety of different backgrounds and cultures. But they all had one thing in common: the determination to make this space colony a success. They had brought with them the technology and resources needed to make the colony sustainable and successful. The colonists had many tasks ahead of them. They needed to build the infrastructure of the colony, such as housing, water, and power. They needed to develop the agriculture and industry that would provide food and resources for the colony. And they needed to establish a government that would ensure the safety and well-being of the colonists. It was a daunting task, but the colonists were determined to make it work. Chapter 1: Arrival. The colonists' ship arrived in the Gliese 667cc system, after a long journey. It had taken them nearly 200 years to make the journey, and they were exhausted after their long journey. But they were also excited to finally be here, and they had high hopes for the future of the colony. The colonists disembarked from the ship and were welcomed by the leaders of the colony, who had been working hard to get the colony ready for their arrival. They were given a tour of the colony, and were introduced to the various facilities that had been built. The colonists were amazed by the progress that had been made in such a short time. Everything seemed to be in order, and they were confident that the colony could be a success. Chapter 2: Settling in. The colonists began to settle in and get to work on establishing the colony. They worked hard to build the infrastructure, such as housing, water, and power, and they worked to develop the agriculture and industry to provide food and resources for the colony. They also worked to create a government and laws to ensure the safety and well-being of the colonists. The colonists worked together to create a system that would benefit everyone in the colony and ensure that the colony would be successful. It was hard work, but the colonists were determined to make it work. They worked long hours and put in a lot of effort to make sure that the colony was a success. Chapter 3: Growing Pains. Despite the colonists' hard work, there were still many problems that needed to be solved. There were disagreements between the colonists over how the colony should be run, as well as disagreements between the colonists and their leaders. The colonists also faced shortages of food and resources, as well as problems with the infrastructure. The colony was also far away from other civilizations, and the colonists had to be very careful to ensure that they did not make any mistakes that could endanger the colony. It was a difficult time, but the colonists kept working hard and eventually, they were able to overcome these problems. Chapter 4: Success. The colonists' hard work paid off, and the colony was a success. The infrastructure was up and running, and the agriculture and industry were providing food and resources for the colony. The government was functioning smoothly, and the colonists were safe and well protected. The colony was now self-sustaining, and the colonists had achieved their goal. They had created a successful space colony on the Gliese 667cc system. Epilogue. The colonists had achieved their goal of creating a successful space colony on the Gliese 667cc system. They had faced many challenges along the way, but they had persevered and succeeded in creating a safe and prosperous colony. The colony was a beacon of hope for other colonies in the universe, a testament to what could be achieved if people worked together and persevered. The colony was a success, and the colonists were proud of their accomplishment.